I don't believe that everybody should be going to university or college. But back then, I mean, this was my parents, and it was kind of like, get good grades, get into a good university, study hard, start working for like a really big, good company, and then kind of work there until retirement. That was the golden plan. I try different things, and I encourage young people to try different things. So my best friend was doing business, and I said, okay, fine, let me just start doing something kind of like you. Let me get in there and figure it out. I was really under impression that I was going to do marketing because I love marketing. I love sales. Like, I'm not very good at sales, but I just love the psychology behind it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself one teeny tiny little favor and make sure to give us a follow, because I don't want you to miss out on any of the amazing guests I got coming on this year. Without further ado, let's get right into this one. Maya, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to get to meet you, to get to know you yet, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
So, hi everyone. My name is Maya Corbic. I am a CPA, and I have been actually teaching children and youth about money for the past 11 years. Anything from credit cards to budgeting to investing. I want everyone to become financially independent and wealthy.
Amazing. So Maya, I always love doing this. Take us back in the time machine to little Maya. What was it like growing up? What was the topic of money like? What was your upbringing like when you were, kind of first getting your, first started walking?
So I actually didn't grow up in North America. I grew up in Bosnia, which ended up having a war. But when I was little, I grew up in a upper middle class family for Bosnia, which would, I guess, be a little bit different for North American families. People have a lot more stuff here, so the standard is a little bit different. So we didn't lack anything basic, but my parents, they didn't really talk about money. I think I learned a lot more by absorption. There was always, I guess, I always felt like I wanted more money. I
Yeah.
wanted things, but it was more dependent on what my parents were willing to give me or buy. My mom was always a strong believer of like not giving money to kids because she believed that money was the root of all evil or it would spoil us.
Yeah.
um, but then war happened when I was in my teens, and we ended up losing everything in the war, and we ended up immigrating. And I immigrated with my parents and my brother, and we only had two suitcases and $50. So we kind of had to
Wow.
start from scratch. And I lived in government shelters and government housing. I had two part-time jobs when I was a teenager, just to pay for my school supplies, bus tickets, and so on. And yeah, I just worked my way up, became a CPA, and maybe I'll just end there and let you ask your questions because I know that's quite a lot already.
Yeah, so I want to start off because my grandparents immigrated here too. Well, I was born here in the States, but my mom and everyone, my brothers, her brothers and uncles and aunts, whatever, they were all born in Dominican Republic, and then they immigrated here. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was about like maybe 30 years back, 30, 40 years back, and they pretty much kind of similar, just up, and left everything behind and came here with a dream. My oldest uncle, my mom's oldest brother, he actually had to stay behind. So it was the three brothers, the three younger brothers, and then my mom and my aunt, and then my two grandparents on my mom's side. They all came here together. My dad, and on his side of the family, he immigrated to the States when he was in sixth grade, and he moved without his family. So he pretty much came out here alone. So it's like
At like 12? He was 12.
something similar, yeah, somewhere around there.
Wow.
He he came from Guatemala. So I mean, I'm not sure all the details of the story. As you know, male ego tends to like exaggerate some things every now and then. But according to my dad, that's when he moved around here. So he didn't really have schooling or education. He just kind of came and worked and figured stuff out. And I mean, they were kind of, at least in Guatemala and his culture, he was, brought up working. So it's like kids there reach maturity a lot sooner just because the responsibility is forced upon them a lot earlier on in life. So it's like I didn't get to experience that. As I said, I was born here. So for anyone who hasn't immigrated, like what was that experience like?
Well, I think there's definitely a cultural shock, right? Because
Mm.
yes, you see things in the movies, and I remember watching 90210 Beverly Hills. Like, I mean, that's your generation is way younger, but it's like, they lived in these beautiful houses, these beautiful neighborhoods, and then we came and it wasn't anything like it. First of all, I mean, the there was abundance of things, but um it wasn't just given to you. Like,
Yeah.
the good thing was, like, with North America, is that there is an opportunity that you can earn your wealth. So, but you really, when you're starting from scratch. So for me, it was really hard. For us, actually, it was really hard because we didn't really come from nothing. Like, we had stuff, and then all of a sudden we had nothing. So we really
Yeah.
had to kind of work hard to acquire things. But also, we had no connections, no networks. We didn't speak English. It was really difficult,
Yeah.
especially, I would say, the first 5 years were probably the hardest. And then it just started getting a little bit easier when, all of a sudden we were making some connections. You're trying to understand how the system here works. Also, for me, I come from a country that used to be communist country, communist
Yeah.
and socialist. So the system, the monetary system, is very, very different.
Yeah.
And my parents never invested because investing was not an option. There was no stock market there. They didn't even have credit cards. So things were a lot different, and they couldn't teach me any of these things, so I had to teach myself.
Yeah. So take us back in the story. So you came here, you started working two jobs just to, get you by through school. From there, did you end up going to a university? Like, what was life like? So you working two jobs. Where did you go from there?
Yeah, so I was working two jobs. I was a really good student. I That was my ticket out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting nowadays. I'm like, I'm not 100% sure whether, it's one of those things. I don't believe that everybody should be going to university or college.
Yeah.
But back then, I mean, this is what I was told by my parents, and it was kind of like, get good grades, get into a good university, study hard, start working for like a really big good company, and then kind of work
Yeah.
there until retirement. That was the golden plan.
Yeah.
And so that's what I followed. And I was a really good student. And I knew that was my only way out because my parents couldn't help me. And so I got into University of Toronto, and I actually got into like one of the better programs, like one of the best programs. And again, worked really hard to get my degree. And then from there, I secured a job with an accounting firm,
Yeah.
and I was able to get my CPA designation paid for so that I didn't have to pay for it because I already took student loans.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so then I ended up becoming a CPA. I had this really good job with an accounting firm. But when I say it was a good job, it was a good job. Like, it's something that I wanted, I wished for. But then, when you're working there, it's not 9 to 5, it's more like 5 to 9. And you're working these crazy hours. It's a corporate world, right? So I was there for about 8 years, and then I decided to do my own thing.
Yeah. So take us back a little bit. So you went to college, you went to University of Toronto. So similar to you, I knew my ticket out was with academics. So I didn't know that entrepreneurship was something that I wanted to do. When I was back in high school, I just knew that school always came easy to me. Like, I didn't have straight A's and I wasn't in like the college level courses, mainly because I didn't apply myself enough. But I got good enough grades and I got into about like 13 colleges when I was in high school. And from there, I ended up going to university. That was before the pandemic happened. Um, and so for me, a lot of people knock school, but like for me as well, like that was the only plan I knew. So I just knew what I had to do was get me a good enough grade and I'll figure out the rest later. And a lot of times, like, people don't like what they're currently in now and don't have another option or another option that they see, and they screw up the only vehicle they have. Like for me, it was always of the mindset of like, all right, since I don't know any other options, I might as well make the most of this one. And if other options present themselves, then I'll be open to that in the future. And so that's how, for me, I went about going to high school. I got good enough grades to get into college. Once I got to college, my eyes opened up to entrepreneurship. I kind of just took my own route. So take us through that time. So you started working as a CPA, right? Was money always something that you were interested once you came to North America? Like, where did that interest about money come about? Because you said you came from a communist country. The monetary system was very different. You were working two jobs, right? So, like, where did the interest of becoming a CPA spark?
You know what? Actually, I didn't know I wanted to be a CPA. So I was kind of like you too. I was like, oh, just get me to university and I'll figure out what I want to do. And I try different things, and I encourage young people to try different things. So
Yeah.
I when I was in high school, I remember doing a co-op in a dentist office, and I was like, oh, I know dental career pays well, let me see if I like it. And I hated it. I was like,
Yeah.
this is not for me. And then I took biology class, and I thought, okay, maybe I can be a doctor. And we dissected a rat, and I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, this is definitely not for me. So I tried different things, and then just really did not know what to do. I thought maybe engineering. Again, I think I ended up going to an open house, and I was like, this is like, I'm really good at math and sciences. It's just, this is not right. Like, I just don't see myself here. So my best friend was doing business, and I said, okay, fine. Let me just start doing something kind of like you. Let me get in there and figure it out. And originally, I was really under the impression that I was going to do marketing because I love marketing. I love sales. Like, I'm not very good at sales, but I just love the psychology behind it.
Yeah.
And you know, my when my last year of university rolled around, I was only then, I mean, I wish I did this earlier, but only then I started like doing a bit of research. Okay, how much does the starting position in marketing pay once you get out of university? And I realized it doesn't pay that much. It was like back then, and I'm dating myself, like this is like 20 years ago. It was like getting paid like mid 20s, like 27,000 or something like that. I was like, I could have done that straight out of high school. Like, why did I even bother going to university? I had student loans. So again, like my really good, a couple of my really good friends, they were doing the CPA route, and I thought, okay, I'm like that, I'm gonna do this. And I was always good with numbers, but I didn't really even know what this entailed, how difficult it was to become a CPA. And I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that a lot of my decisions were guided by money, because when you don't have any money, you're literally relying on yourself. Like, I couldn't rely on my parents to give me anything. It was all me. So it was kind of like, okay, how can I make the most amount of money and just live a decent lifestyle, and hopefully one day have a family that I can support with this money? So a lot of these decisions were guided by, okay, where can I make the most money that I'm, you know, not squeamish if I'm like dissecting people or rats or whatever, right? So it
Yeah.
ended up being a CPA designation. So that's kind of how I ended up in it. And I was very confused at the beginning, because all these people that I went to school with, they knew they wanted to do this for years. They've done their research. They even got jobs like with the best CPA firms right away. I didn't, because I made that decision very late in the game. So
Yeah.
one of my first employers was a small CPA firm, and back in the day, I used to think that was a big failure, because all like my salary was drastically lower. I remember starting at like $32,000 a year. They started, I think, at 42 or $45,000 a year. They had all these benefits, and it was amazing. But in hindsight, you know, things happen for a reason. And I learned at that small firm more than my friends ever learned at a big firm, because it was just me working directly with a partner who's a CPA. And I learned not only bookkeeping, I learned taxes, I learned audit, I learned all sorts of stuff. And I had to kind of handle and take jobs from beginning to the end. And it was a very, very good experience for me.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, for me, I had like a kind of similar experience where, like in football, right? On my team, we had a very small senior class, so it's like you pretty much. I had no choice but to go both ways and play offense and defense, and so it's like I'm bouncing around positions, and I learned so much about so many different things. And even when I worked in a restaurant too, it's like one day someone will call out, and like this is during the pandemic, so it's like people were calling out sick pretty often. This is like it wasn't rare for a couple people to call out at the same time, and so it's like, oh well, John, I know you're a busser, but we also need you to food run, and can you also help behind the bar as well? And it's like when you have these situations where you're not like as well resourced as like some of these bigger companies or these bigger organizations, you kind of just have to get your hands dirty and just do a bunch of stuff that maybe not technically in your job description, but you get so more like real world experience when you get thrown into the wolves in situations like that. And so you said you started working for about 8 years before you started to do your own thing. Like, what was that tipping point for you that made you finally like pull the plug on your corporate career and decide to pivot and shift, where you wanted to head? Like, what made that happen for you? Take us back to that time.
Sure. So it was actually, I should say, I worked really 10 years because it was 2 years at a small accounting firm.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I got hired by a big accounting firm called Deloitte and Touche. They're like one of the top
Mm-hmm.
ones. And so with Deloitte, I was with them for about 8 years. And I was 32 when I quit, and the reason why I ended up quitting, it was kind of twofold. So by the time I was 32, my husband and I ended up paying off all of our mortgage and debt, and that debt included my student loans. Well, I had student loans, he had like car loans, whatever. So $60,000 of debt and mortgage, and we were debt free. At that time, I also had two children. My son was 6, and my daughter was about 4, and I was working insane hours at Deloitte. Anybody who works for those big firms, they're great, but you're not working 9 to 5. You're working 5 to 9. You're working around the clock, weekends. And I even tried working flex hours. I couldn't make it work. Like I just really couldn't. And so my health started to suffer, and I wasn't seeing my kids enough. And um, one day my husband just said to me, he's like, well, why don't you quit? Like, we really don't need you to work anymore. Like, we had no debt, we had no mortgage. Like, why are you working? Right. And it was so strange because, I wasn't raised to think that way. I mean, I also, as I said, I come from a different system too, where women worked. There were very, very few women that were stay-at-home moms and like stayed with the kids. And usually the women back there that did that were women that were not educated. Whereas here it's different. I have some friends, they're doctors, optometrists, but they choose to stay at home with their kids. So in my head, like I always thought I was going to work, and I was going to work until I retire. So the fact that I could like just leave my work, it was freeing. It was scary. I ended up quitting, but I was crying the entire time I was telling people I was quitting. And then they said to me, they really like I was actually I was a very good employee. And they didn't want me to quit. So they said, why don't you take a year off and really think about it? Take our laptop. They even offered to pay me something like a leave, some money, but I decided not to take it. But just the fact that, they said, okay, take a year, think about it. It gave me that comfort that if I made a mistake, I could always go back.
Yeah.
So I left. And after a year of not working there and just kind of doing my own thing, I realized that, you know what, like I don't want to go back to that. Thankfully, I didn't need to go back to that because we were financially in a good place. And so and it was strange because when I was telling people that I quit, people thought I was nuts because everybody was asking me, like, where are you going? Like, what's your next job? And I was like, well, I don't have a next thing. And people are like, oh, you're crazy, you're throwing away your designation. And I'm like, that's not what I'm doing. I'm just looking for something different. And at that time I didn't really know much about entrepreneurship. I didn't even know that was a potential path for me, but I knew I was ready for something different.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's amazing. I hope everyone like picks up on a lesson that you kind of share without actually sharing it, of like money is good for the good that money can do. And because you guys were financially situated, you were able to s- prioritize the things that valued most in your life, which was your family. And it's like a lot of times we give up those we cherish most just so we can make ends meet, and then lose all the time that we wanted to, spend back with the people we cherish. And sometimes like the people that we cherish, by the time we make that money, aren't there anymore. And I know a couple people that happened to. One of my good friends that interviewed on my podcast a few weeks ago, and he was like, yeah, he was working like 16, 17-hour days. And, he ended up having his dad pass away, and it's like, didn't get to see him at all. And it was like situations like that. It's like, yeah, we have to hustle, we have to make ends meet and stuff like that. But it's like, at what cost? And
Yeah.
knowing, being self-aware to know like when you're paying too much, right? When you're giving up too much time, when you're losing time with your loved ones, and being aware of that is super important. And so I love that you shared that. And so you took that year off, right? You decided to get away from everything, and you have all these people in your head. When I dropped out of college, it was a similar experience. Like everyone in my family, I was the golden child. It was like, oh my goodness, John, like you're gonna be the first Mendez to graduate. Like, what are you doing? Yada yada. But like in Spanish instead of English. Like, oh my goodness, you know. And it was for me. It was one of those situations where it's like, you guys can't see what I'm cooking up right now, but like I don't know what it is that I'm cooking up right now, but it's something. I know something's on a pot and it's stirring and it smells good. I just know I just gotta I keep with it. And so like for you, like what allowed you to persevere through that? Because I feel like I mean at any age it's difficult, but when you're younger, you're a bit more impressionable. And what the older, you know, the more seasoned and the older generations think tends to have weigh a little bit more on us. So it's like, what advice do you have there to stick with your vision for what you want to do with your life?
It's so interesting that you say that because I feel like I've been cooking things for the last 11 years, right? And um, it's funny. I know people, and I have this personality. People won't say stuff to my face because I don't have a filter, so stuff will come out without even me realizing. So I will go into attack mode right away, which is sometimes beneficial because then people will not say stuff to me. But at the same time, it's not good because no filter is never really good. But they didn't really. My family didn't really directly say anything, but I know that friends and family were talking. And the best thing that I think I did was just ignore them. The good thing was I had support from my husband. Him and I were on the same page because when you're married, it's different. Like I think most of your audience is not married, and
Mhm.
then you're just accountable to you. But when you have another person, you're accountable to them. I'm accountable to my kids. So as long as my husband was 100% on the same page as me and he supported me, that's all that mattered. Like I had his support. And over the years, like I know that people probably thought like, what is she doing? What does she think she's doing? Like, what is this Instagram thing? But like once my Instagram hit 100,000 followers, people were like, oh. And
Mhm.
now it's at 129,000 followers. And it's like, oh, if I tell you that, and I don't do many brand deals because I really want to make sure that whoever if I do any sponsorships, that brand really resonates with me. But like I've done a few, and like I've done a brand deal like for 45 seconds and I got $2,750 for it. So
Mhm.
when you do stuff like that, that's when they're like, oh. But for years they're doubting you, right? So
Yeah.
it's almost like you just need to tune out the noise, and even if you don't know 100% what it is that you're cooking up, like I I felt like all these years I was onto something, and I'm still onto something. I'm still not 100% clear. I've got a lot of things going on. I have this book that's coming out. I have the membership club. I have Instagram. But people are starting to take notice. Even like because I live in Canada, the CPA Institute, like they ignored me, but the CPA Ontario, which is the province where I live, they actually asked me to be a keynote speaker for their financial literacy month event that's happening. But it took 11 years, right?
Yeah.
So you just work on your craft, you get really, really, really good at it that they cannot ignore you anymore, and just tune out the noise.
Yeah, Alex Ramosi says something similar. It's like the best revenge is becoming so successful that people can't help but be, overwhelmed by your light. He doesn't say exactly word for word like that, but like something around those lines. Just like become so good at what you do that no one can ignore you, and that they have no choice but to accept what you got going on. And so, like, what kind of birthed the whole Instagram thing? Because I know we kind of talked when we went over at FinCon, but like, what made you want to start teaching other parents about money? I know you guys were able to come debt free and everything like that, but like, what inspired you to teach? Because there's something about teaching, like you kind of have to have a heart for it, right? Because a lot of times, especially when you try to teach someone and then they listen but they don't implement, or they just aren't receptive, it can kind of suck sometimes being a teacher, because it's like you have all this knowledge and gems that you want to give out to the world, but it's like no one's listening and no one's paying attention. So it's like, what kind of helped spark that teacher in you? Did you always kind of have that? And like, how did that translate with the whole Instagram thing when you were starting off?
Yeah, so that's interesting. Like I think I've been born a teacher.
Mm.
Even though, which is so interesting, when I was trying to choose my career, I never thought of becoming a teacher. I don't know why. I thought of becoming a doctor, a dentist, all these things, engineer. A teacher didn't even cross my mind. But ever since I was a little kid, like I would actually pretend to be like, I would pretend play to be a teacher, and I would have like my toys lined up and I'd be teaching them. I have a younger brother who's 5 years younger, so like I enjoy teaching him anything and everything. I would tutor kids in math for my class for free, like just because I wanted them to succeed. And so, like, I've always been teaching, and I somehow, I don't know how, and I can't explain it, but like, I know when people get it and when
Yeah.
people are not getting it. And if people are not getting it, I'm able to kind of step back and analyze it really quickly and figure out, okay, how can I make somebody understand what it is that I'm trying to teach? So, but it was really interesting because when I worked for Deloitte and Touche, once a year we would have these volunteer opportunities. And I don't know if you've heard of Junior Achievement. They're pretty big
Yeah.
in the States. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they provide financial literacy education. And I actually got to volunteer for them. And I would, what we did, and I did that for a couple of years. I would go into class. Uh, and basically teach from like 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's like a typical school day in Canada. And I would come back from those days, like I would come home and I would be glowing, absolutely glowing. And my husband was like, he's like, I've never seen you like this. Like, this is what you're meant to be doing. But I was in a completely different career. Like, I was auditing companies. I was, doing tax returns and whatnot. So I had no idea how those two were going to merge, if at all, right?
Yeah.
And then when I quit my job, as I said, my kids were very little, 6 and 4, and I think at that time my son was telling me he wanted me to buy a new car. I was driving Jeep Cherokee, and he wanted me to buy a Ferrari. And I was like, okay, well, do you know how much a Ferrari costs? And he had absolutely no concept of prices, or, he just knew Ferrari was like a cute, good looking car, right? Um, so then I realized, I was like, my kids don't know anything about money, and I wanted to teach them. And back 11 years ago, there were not that many resources on financial literacy for kids or youth. Now there's so much. There's a lot out there. And then I started looking at like the school system and the curriculum and what are they going to learn there. And I realized again, like they weren't going to learn much. And so remembering me going back for junior achievement and teaching this in schools, like I was so excited. So I kind of created my own curriculum to teach my own kids. And pretty soon after that, like I was teaching other people's kids, I was going to schools and doing workshops. And so my business was born out of that.
That's amazing. And it's crazy how like you kind of get thrown into an opportunity and it ends up turning like I have such a similar story, but not with kids. Essentially, like for me, I was in real estate and I got asked to teach a class on social media. Now I never taught a class before, and at the time I was teaching realtors. At the time, I didn't have never sold a house, but I was teaching realtors who are selling tons of houses left and right about social media. So I had a ton of imposter syndrome because like all these successful realtors are closing deals. I haven't closed any deals. Like, why do they want me to teach? And then I taught, and it was like the adrenaline high I got from teaching was like insane. And just like seeing the reaction and seeing the comment section, I was like, all right, I could get used to this. Like this is pretty fun. And for me, that kind of sparked everything that I have going on now, and eventually led to teaching AI. And now I'm teaching. I have a work literally tomorrow. From the day we're recording this, I'm teaching a workshop in person. Um, but had I think I made a video on this literally the other day on Instagram, or I think I was talking to someone. I forget what it was, but I was talking about how the game plan I originally drew up looks nothing like what is going on now, like at all. Like I thought I was gonna be a top realtor in my office, selling houses left and right, and it's like crazy how it all plays out, and how if you just, I would say you don't have to be correct, you just have to be directionally correct. As long as I kept heading in the right direction, I didn't know where exactly I was going or how it looked like, but I just knew that I got to keep doing stuff. I got to keep trying stuff. I got to keep throwing myself in. And from there, as I kept doing that, it started clearing out more. And so for you, back to your story, right? So you started teaching this, the junior achievement, and that kind of helped plant the seed of teaching. Now, at what point did you start to catch steam with your IG presence? Because as you said, you have tons of followers now, and what did that evolve into? Like once it started to pick up and get going.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. Like I feel like our stories are in a way parallel because you're like, I didn't know what I thought I was gonna do this, but here I am, I'm doing this. As long as you like keep doing things, I think that's what really matters. I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
So I was actually trying to really get into schools. I was getting into some schools, but schools have a lot of red tape. And I knew I had
Mm,
a good program. As long as like if I could just teach it once, I knew they were going to invite me back. But just getting into schools, talking to the principals, or like going to the head office, it was such a mess. So it was kind of like hit and miss. It was going, but it wasn't going. And then COVID happened, and I like realized I couldn't go into schools anymore and teach. So what I had to do was change my game plan, and I ended up going on Instagram. And I would say the first year was very kind of not productive. I mean, it wasn't. No, it was productive. I mean, I was working very hard, but I wasn't seeing the results, and it was just one of
yeah.
those like, okay, stick with it. And I just tried to like make my posts relevant to people. Like I realized that like, okay, I don't have many followers. Like, what is happening here? And I realized that people are not really like, why aren't people liking my post? Why aren't people sharing my post? Well, it's because I'm not teaching them anything. Like, would I share this post? Like, what kind of value am I providing? So I started focusing on providing more value with my posts and essentially teaching through my Instagram account.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because sometimes we're so scared of doing some things. Like I remember before COVID, people were telling me to start doing webinars because I would get wider exposure, maybe more global exposure. And I was just lazy and partially scared. Like I didn't want to do it. And in the end, COVID forced me into it.
Yeah.
So with that, like I had to, like I started doing Instagram, and then through Instagram, like people were asking for these like online workshops, and I started doing those and just providing value. I think when you provide value, that's when not only you're helping people, but you get to grow, your business gets to grow. So that's really what happened with Instagram. And now I feel like Instagram is the driving force behind my business. Like a lot of my leads come through Instagram. So a lot of people that join my Wealthy Kids Investment Club, which is a membership program for families to invest, they come because of Instagram, because they see what I post there, they get inspired. As you know, I'm publishing a book, so a
Mhm.
lot of that stuff is like I'm advertising the book through there, and a lot of the book now the pre-orders are being, uh, they're all coming through Instagram. So it's really interesting. I never really wanted to be an Instagram influencer, but I guess I ended up being one
Yeah.
because it just kind of happened.
Yeah, you're providing value, and the marketplace responded well to it, and it kind of picked up what you had going on, and you came from a genuine place, and you stayed consistent. And when you were talking, it just made me like visualize. There's like a meme, well, not a meme, like a photo I seen on Facebook one time, and it was like, why when our business doesn't get results, we constantly check in every single day, every single hour to say, oh, did it hit yet? Did we get a sale? Did we get a deal? Like whatever, whatever. But when you plant a seed, like you plant a seed and you don't dig it back up every hour to check it or every day to check it. You maybe dig it up once a year to maybe put it in a bigger pot. It's like when a lot of the times we'll plant a seed and then we keep on stunting our growth by like being so overly caught up with the growth and the result and not caught up with nourishing it and providing that value as you said. And for self-reflecting, like, is this something valuable? Like, is my stuff even good? Like, a lot of people post, especially in real estate, because that's where I know most of the people I've met through. But it's like a lot of times these realtors will post content and it's like, who cares about the market? Like, literally, there's not, I'm not gonna say there's not a single. There's probably a handful, but the majority of people I know that I met in real estate never seen a real estate post until they got into real estate and they had to market their business. So it's like, if you're only doing this now after you got your license and your audience are people without licenses, like, do you think any of them actually care about like how many houses are on the market right now in your city? Like, how many times did you check that when before you got like you never? No, most people never do the ugly work of looking themselves in the mirror and pointing out all the things that they're doing wrong. Like pointing out that your content sucks, pointing out that maybe that didn't provide value. And if you do that enough time, well, eventually you'll not suck as much, and then eventually you'll actually be good, and then eventually you'll actually be like, oh my goodness, like John, this is amazing, or Maya, this is great, like, oh my, thank you for sharing it. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of self-reflecting before you can ever get to that stage, and most people never take the time to do so. And so, I mean, you mentioned earlier about your son, and I was gonna ask you this earlier, but I wanted to keep on going with the story. Like, he asked about a Ferrari, and that kind of sparked the realization that, kids don't know much about money. So it's like, you've taught a lot of parents, you taught a lot of kids. Like, what are some of the main misconceptions that you see when you're teaching people about like what money is and how it can be used? Because you said you were brought up in a situation where like money is the root of all evil, but clearly after learning and growing with your money, I'm pretty sure you think otherwise. You know that it's not the root of all evil. It's loving money is what causes it to be the root. So, what are some of the misconceptions you help kids overcome when you're teaching them?
Well, I think it's really important to teach them. Oh gosh, it's a fully loaded question. There's
Yeah.
quite a bit, but I think like one of them is investing, whether it's real estate or stock market. I actually really think that we need to not make it taboo and talk about investing. I think investing intimidates a lot of people, and it's really simple. It's more the jargon that intimidates a lot of people. So a famous investor, Peter Lynch, said that anybody who has completed grade 4 can learn how to invest. So the problem with investing, I think, is that a lot of people think of it as gambling, and it's only gambling when you don't know what you're doing, when you are uneducated. And there are also 3 different types of investing. So a lot of people want to get rich quickly, and if you're going to invest, maybe you can get rich quickly, but that can also be a problem. So you can actually not get rich quickly. You can lose a lot of your money quickly. So sometimes I just want people to realize that we can all get rich, but we can all get rich slowly and with some education. So the people there are, as I said, 3 different types of investing. There are day traders who will invest into stock market, and they don't even hold the stock for the whole day. And then there's people who invest into short-term um, investments, and they're just holding the stocks for a couple of days, maybe a month or so. And then there are long-term investors, and most of us are long-term investors because we do have these long-term goals. So the investing strategy for that is very different. And again, like, I just think that the best way to grow your wealth is through investing, whether it's investing in stock market, whether it's investing in real estate. Just leaving money sitting in the savings account, it doesn't help us because it gets eaten by inflation. Its purchasing power diminishes. So a lot of times, I guess the misconception is people think that, oh, I'm saving, I'm doing well. Well, yes, that's only part of the success, but if you don't invest that money will diminish in value because of the inflation. So this is like just one of the things that I try to communicate to younger generations.
And so let me ask you this then. So how much does it cost to buy a Ferrari if someone did want to buy one?
I thought, like, I don't know. Last time I researched it, I thought it was like, and this is Canadian dollars. So maybe in the US dollars, maybe it's a little bit cheaper, but
Yeah.
I thought it was like 230,000, or is it $200,000, maybe in American dollars? And I think it depends also what kind of Ferrari it is, right?
Yeah, there's that too. Did your son ever end up getting a Ferrari?
No, no, he did not. But you know what? Like, I mean, one story I wanted to share with him, and I wish, actually, I don't think I ever shared this with him, but online, I actually saw this couple. They are very, very much into exotic cars. And
Yeah.
so they ended up starting this business where they got the loan from the bank, and they bought all these, not too many, but some exotic cars that they get to drive and enjoy themselves, but they're also renting them. And so when they're renting them, the any kind of expenses related to these cars are deductible for their business. Plus
Yeah.
they're making money in renting these cars. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because there's always a way to get what you want. You just have to be creative about, how you're going to accomplish it.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of something you mentioned earlier too. Like, you said that you realized that your kids didn't know anything about money, and you were able to spot that, and that's like something that I don't want people to overlook. Like, the ability to see gaps in the market is a skill on its own. And what I'm learning as I'm growing, I'm still in the like, more beginning stages of my entrepreneurial journey, but like the better you can get at seeing those gaps and seeing them early, I think it definitely helps with like progressing in your journey and finding opportunities that could really change your life. I feel is getting good and learning how to build that muscle of finding the gaps. I think it's something that, as I said, have been playing out for me. Like the AI stuff, I taught a class, and the only reason I taught that class is because I joined the mastermind, and in the mastermind they had a class on ChatGPT. So within 2 weeks, instead of me waiting on it, within 2 weeks I already had my presentation that I taught, and I was teaching a webinar. And it's like that speed can help take a lot of people a long way, especially when you're still not that in it, experienced, when you're still starting off. And so, Maya, man, it's been amazing talking to you. Where can we keep up with you? I know you have a lot of amazing stuff, stuff coming out. Like, where can we find you at? Where can we keep up with you if we want to get more information, more knowledge on investing, more information about your group? Like, where can we find you at?
Yeah, sure. So the my Instagram handle is teach.kids.money. I do have a blue check mark next to my name. There are a lot of scammers, so be careful you follow the right account. My membership club is wealthykids.club. So wealthykids.club, not .com, .club. And you can find more information there if you want to learn the basics of investing. And I have a book that's coming out just now, and it's available on Amazon. It's called From Piggy Banks to Stocks, the Ultimate Guide for a Young Investor. If you see this book, do not be alarmed. I know it looks very kiddish, but that is the reason why I purposefully made it like that, because it's kind of like the Dummy series, because
Yeah.
I want everybody to feel comfortable with the investment basics. And it's written in a language that a 10-year-old can understand. So when I had people test it out, these families that tested it, it was some parents and kids, and the parents actually came back to me and they said, we love your book because finally, like, we're not intimidated by investing. So that's why it looks the way it looks.
I mean, and I think there was Index Funds for Dummies was like the third book I ever read. And like it definitely helped me out a ton. So, I definitely recommend reading books when you find a topic that interests you, because that'll help take you so much further, and so much faster as well. And so, Maya, now it's time for our famous 5 questions. Question number one: what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
I think the most impactful lesson I've learned in life would be to always, be open and give. It doesn't matter. This is one thing that my mom taught me. She said that, if you see somebody suffering, or if you see people struggling, or if somebody comes to you for help, and this can be like in business or everyday life, even if you're not in the position to help, then at least like think who you know that can help, right? But if you can help, if you can do something, even if it's just a little bit, do that for people, because it always comes back threefold, fivefold, tenfold. It's karma. I think it's really good.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
I would like to say it's honesty. I don't know why that's the first thing that popped in my head. Maybe I should have prepared myself ahead of time. For me, it's honesty, and I know a lot of people cannot. Honesty can be hard to handle, right? Like no filter. But I'm that kind of person, and I'd rather tell me people what they think than sugarcoat something. I'd rather know where I stand with people than if people BS me.
If you had to change someone's life, but you only had one book to give them, which book would it be?
My favorite book of all times is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Have you read it?
I have not yet, but
Oh,
I have the audiobook if I'm not mistaken.
So I listened to the audiobook and I ended up buying the book itself. And then I afterwards ended up gifting that book to a few people. There is a lot to unpack there. I kind of use it like a textbook. And I just think that they say 95% of what we do out of habits, we do on autopilot. So if
Hmm.
we can create the right habits that can sustain us in the long run to become better version of ourselves, then I'm all for it. And that's what Atomic Habits is all about. It's about like these little steps that we can do, just tiny, tiny little steps
Hmm.
every day that make huge results at the end. And essentially, when you ask me about my Instagram account, what helped it grow so big, I felt like that book was the driving force behind my Instagram account. Every day I try to make my Instagram account just a little bit better.
That's amazing. What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
I think the legacy that I'm trying to leave behind is that, I guess, the I want everybody to understand that we can all be wealthy. Um, the ideal world that I would love to live in is where people have so much money and so much wealth that they don't have to work if they don't want to. But they're working because they want to, because they're working at the jobs that they really, really enjoy. Um, and so I know that that can be done if we start investing early enough and managing our money right. um and as I guess it's our parents' duty to help our kids do that, but sometimes not all parents do that, not all schools do that. So sometimes we as individuals, we have to do that, and it's possible. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the legacy I'd like to leave.
And for anyone that wants to embark on their walk to wealth today, what is the first step you recommend they take?
Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah. So for anyone that wants to like kind of start their walk to wealth today, like assuming they just heard this podcast, they never thought about, building wealth or, living a, their ideal dream life or whatever, and you only had one step you could, give them, like what would you recommend that first step be to help get them on the right track?
I would say just start paying yourself first. And I'm putting that in quotation marks. What that means is, um, in whatever money you have coming in, take a little bit, put it aside, and kind of forget about it. And then the rest of the money you can spend or do whatever you need to do with it. But this money that you've put aside, eventually you will, if you keep doing that, this money will accumulate, and then you can invest it. Invest it into whether it's real estate or stock market, or invest it into yourself. Get yourself educated, invest it into courses, conferences that will make you better, so that you can learn more and you can be more productive and you can generate more wealth.
100%. Well, Maya, thanks again for hopping on. Thank you for telling us your story and sharing the lessons along the way and all the nuggets you dropped. I really did appreciate it. And thank you for hopping on.
Thank you, John, for having me. This has been a lot of fun.